Welcome to part 2 of our Wild West unit. Settling on the plains. Life on the plains was different from anything the settlers had experienced before, with summers getting as hot as 110 degrees and winters dropping below zero. While cabins had primarily been made with logs or stones, the plains did not have either of these resources, so the settlers had to resort to using grass sod, the top layer of grass and soil, like the one pictured. Bricks were made by drying the sod in the sun, and they actually were able to keep the cool in during the summer and heat during the winter. That being said, the walls were always infested with pests, the roof leaked during storms, and the houses were always small. Farmers also had to dig deep wells, 200 to 300 feet down, and build windmills that would bring up water since there were few rivers or lakes. They also had to use corn cobs to fuel their fire since there wasn't any wood. Changes to farming. Farmers were faced with several problems when trying to farm the Great Plains. The land was rough, there was little rainfall, and there wasn't any wood to make fences in order to keep animals out. Three inventions remedied these problems. The lightweight steel plow made it easy to cut through the land. Barbed wire replaced wooden fencing. The final invention was a new method of farming called dry farming, where water would be collected in ditches when it rained, and then it would be mixed into the soil after the rain and into the roots, preventing the water from evaporating. The only other problems they faced was grasshoppers. Grasshoppers would invade the plains each year, destroying many crops. Despite these hardships, the farmers stayed. Horace Greeley. He lived from 1811 until 1872. He worked primarily as the founder and editor of one of the nation's most influential newspapers in the 1800s, the New York Tribune. He used his influence to try and promote some major reforms he supported, especially the abolition of slavery. He served as a member of the House of Representatives in the 1840s. After the Civil War, he initially supported the Radical Republicans and President Ulysses S. Grant, but he ultimately split from them, joining the new Liberal Republican Party and running for president in 1872. He is best known for his editorial that helped inspire many to move west before and after the Civil War, calling for young men to move west. Oklahoma Land Rush. While many Americans took Greeley's advice and did move west, there was still one place that was off limits: Oklahoma. In the 1830s, the government had established the Indian Territory there, promising they wouldn't be interfered with. On April 22, 1889, after much persuasion, the government announced that starting at noon that day, a large portion of western Oklahoma, initially promised to the Indians, would be open to anyone, first come, first serve. That morning, 100,000 plus people lined up at the border, and once they were given the okay, they all rushed out to grab the best land available. After 2 hours, all the homesteads had been taken, and cities that hadn't existed hours before now boasted thousands of settlers. The closing of the frontier. Since the English began settling in the 1600s, Americans had always been looking west to the frontier. This gave them a character of rugged adventurers, and they idolized heroes such as Lewis and Clark and Daniel Boone because of it. Americans loved the freedom and wildness of the frontier and worked to conquer and tame it. In 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau announced that the frontier was closed. While there was still land available, most of it was not farmable, meaning that most livable land had been taken up. More homesteads were sold in the Great Plains, but this announcement had quite a psychological effect on the American people, and it marked the end of an era. Western legends. The images of the West that we have today, such as gunfighters, rough cowboys, and adventures, actually originated during this time period. Many Eastern newspapers romanticized and exaggerated stories they learned from the West. While many of the stories were from real events and people, newspapers over-embellished the details to entertain their readers. One of the most famous characters was Billy the Kid, who is pictured, who was a real killer and robber. Another famous outlaw was Jesse James, a bank robber and train robber. While both actually existed, newspapers turned them into Robin Hood-like heroes who went on over-the-top adventures. Wild West. The myths of the Wild West were further popularized by Wild West shows in the late 1800s. One of the most popular shows was led by William "Buffalo Bill" Cody, a former Pony Express rider, scout, cowboy, and buffalo hunter. At the shows, there would be riding and shooting contests, stagecoach robberies, and gunfights. One of the most famous attractions was young Annie Oakley, one of the best, if not the best, sharpshooters of her time. Oakley was known for her amazing feats, such as shooting dimes out of the air and shooting cigarettes out of people's mouths without harming them. She later married fellow show member and sharpshooter Frank Butler. The U.S. gains Alaska. In the 1700s, Russia sent a handful of explorers across the Bering Strait to claim Alaska as a territory. They set up a fur trading company there that was successful for about 100 years, but once they ran out of animals, they looked to sell it before it was taken. In 1867, Russia sent Representative Eduard de Stockel to try and sell Alaska to America for at least $5 million. While Manifest Destiny and the closing of the West were important factors to American expansion, no one was really interested in buying Alaska. Regardless, Secretary of State William Seward made a deal with Stockel to purchase Alaska for $7.2 million. After some grumbling, both the Senate and House approved the treaty and sale. Some saw this as a bad deal for the U.S., but it ultimately worked out with rich fishing and oil reserves the country gained with the new territory.